Have you ever wondered if there's a natural way to lower your high blood pressure, guard against Alzheimer's, lose weight, feel better? Well, it turns out there is. Welcome to the Nutrition Facts podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Greger. Today we discover how eating a plant-based diet offers less exposure to the industrial pollutants that bioaccumulate up the food chain.
We lack robust safety data on most of the estimated 30,000 chemicals in wide commercial use registered under the U.S. Toxic Substances Control Act, but the greatest concern may lie in the long-banned legacy chemicals that continue to contaminate the food supply, known as PLOPs, persistent lipophilic organic pollutants. These include dioxins, PCBs, and insecticides such as DDT. How do we drop the PLOPs? Today, most DDT comes from meat, particularly fish. The oceans are essentially humanity's sewer. Everything eventually flows into the sea. Hexachlorobenzene is another banned pesticide that may be carcinogenic, but is more evenly spread among animal food sources, whereas PCBs are also mostly a fish thing. PCBs are a different set of banned chemicals once widely used as insulating fluid in electrical equipment. A study of more than 12,000 food and feed samples across 18 countries found that the highest PCB contamination was found in fish and fish oil, followed by eggs, then dairy, then other meats. Salmon may have the highest concentration, with farm-raised salmon having consistently higher contaminant levels than wild-caught, followed by canned tuna. But since people don't tend to eat a lot of fish, other meat may be the largest exposure for most people. The lowest contamination was found at the bottom of the food chain in plants, which can average 7 to 20 times fewer overall PCB and dioxin-like chemicals compared to ocean or freshwater fish. That's one of the advantages to eating more plant-based in the modern world. By eating from the lowest rung of the food chain, we suffer less exposure to the industrial pollutants that bioaccumulate up the ladder. Every year in the United States, billions of pounds of slaughterhouse byproducts are produced, the vast majority of which are fed right back to the farm animals, particularly chickens, which can recycle toxic heavy metals and industrial chemicals back into the food supply. Lead builds up in bones, and mercury attaches to the protein, which is why egg whites can have 4 times more mercury than do yolks. Most of the lead in the bone meal passes right through the animals into their waste, but then producers can take that waste, cow, pig, and chicken feces, and feed it back to the animals again. So you can see how the levels of contaminants might build up in their bodies, even when the animals themselves may be natural herbivores. Lower pollutant levels may help explain why those eating plant-based appear to be less likely to develop all forms of cancer combined, but their role in longevity is unknown. Heavy metals such as lead appear to accelerate human aging, and most population studies have suggested a strong association between exposure to higher levels of environmental pollutants and shorter telomeres. However, only a few have been found to be significantly related to premature death. One such contaminant is the long-banned pesticide beta-hexachlorocyclohexane. Higher levels in the blood correlate with higher all-cause mortality. A study of the breast milk from 2 sisters with different dietary habits offered a clue on a way to lower exposure. The levels of beta-hexachlorocyclohexane, as well as PCB, DDT, and another banned pesticide, dieldrin, were much lower in the breast milk from the vegetarian mother than the milk of her sister, who was also breastfeeding at the time but included meat in her diet. Studies of the pollutants in breast milk of vegetarians, dating back over 30 years, have found the average levels of some pollutants were 50 to 100 times lower in the vegetarians compared to the national average. In fact, for the 6 out of 7 pollutants they looked at, there wasn't even an overlap in the range of scores. The highest vegetarian value was lower than the lowest value obtained in the general population. Chlorinated PCBs have also been associated with increased mortality risk, suggesting we should minimize exposure, which basically means a reduction in animal fats. The blood of those eating strictly plant-based diets were found to be significantly less polluted, regarding a whole series of PCBs, including those found in the study to be associated with increased mortality, but their lower levels of beta-hexachlorocyclohexane did not reach statistical significance. Those eating plant-based diets have also been found to have markedly lower levels of dioxins in their bodies, as well as decreased contamination with flame-retardant chemical pollutants known as PBDEs. No surprise, given the sources of flame-retardant chemicals in the food supply. Again, even though the highest levels of flame retardants in the U.S. food supply have been found in fish, the primary source of intake for most Americans is poultry, just because we eat so much chicken, followed by processed meat. For some reason, U.S. chickens are about 10 to 20 times more contaminated than chickens tested from some other countries. The longer people go without meat, the lower their levels appear to fall. Eating healthier can also reduce the concentrations of heavy metals in your body. The levels of mercury in the hair of those eating more plant-based diets are found to be 10 times lower than those who eat fish, but you don't know if it's cause and effect until you put it to the test. Within 3 months of switching to a plant-based diet, the levels of mercury, lead, and cadmium growing out in your hair appear to drop significantly, but build back up when meat and eggs are added back into the diet. Unlike heavy metals, though, some organochlorine pollutants can stick around for decades. A USDA examination of the levels of dioxin-like compounds in U.S. meat and poultry indicated a possible concern for U.S. public health, but really mostly for children. The typical U.S. adult daily exposure in meat was well below the EPA-established safety limit. Only children chronically consuming the average daily servings of meat or poultry with the highest levels might exceed it. Taking all 33 chemical pollutants in meat shown to be potentially carcinogenic into account, some European toxicologists suggest limiting children's consumption of beef, pork, and chicken to a combined total of no more than 5 servings a month, so an average of no more than 1 serving of meat every 6 days or so. In Europe, lamb is the most contaminated, and the recommendations calls for adults to eat no more than a single serving every 4 or 5 months. Surprisingly, the consumption of organic meat does not seem to diminish the cancer-causing potential associated with the plomps in meat. All samples were found to be contaminated, with minimal differences between meat-raised organic versus conventional. What can we do to reduce exposure? Eat high-fiber foods, as fiber can bind to some of the contaminants and flush them out of the body. Exercise, as blood levels of persistent pollutants have been found to be lower among physically active individuals, perhaps due to sweating or due to a potential boost in detoxing enzymes, or increased clearance through the bile, at least in rats. Given current contamination levels, meat consumption in general should be significantly modified downward as much and as soon as possible. Though until then, consumers can reduce exposures to dioxins and dioxin-like compounds like PCBs by trimming fat when preparing meat, and further trim and thoroughly drain fat after cooking. The best dietary detox is to not tox in the first place.
Finally today, we look at how we might help flush the pollutants stored in our fat that come spilling out into our bloodstream during weight loss.
Most persistent industrial pollutants, like organochlorine pesticides such as DDT and PCBs, were banned several decades ago, and dioxin emission is strictly regulated. However, we're still exposed to these chemicals through several routes, the major source of which is contaminated food, especially fatty animal products such as fish, meat, and milk. When we eat these chemicals, they get primarily stored in our own fatty tissue, where they slowly leach out into our bloodstream. But better in our fat than in our brain or other vital organs, having more body fat may actually play a protective role by sequestering the toxins away. But they can come spilling out when we lose weight. Body weight loss increases the concentrations of potentially toxic pollutants in obese individuals. Of the 19 pollutants studied, they all went up 15 significantly so. Every study that has looked at it found increased blood levels of toxic pollutants accompanying weight loss, whether induced by diet or bariatric surgery, increases between 14 and 388% with a large enough loss. The more weight that's lost, the higher the pollutant levels climb, because all those chemicals stored in your fat over all those years come spilling out. The theoretical concern is that if released into the blood at a faster rate than they're cleared, the levels of these compounds could become toxic, causing side effects such as sweating, headache, nausea. But the opposite happened when PCB-poisoned patients were fasted. In 1979, about 2,000 people in Taiwan were exposed via an industrial accident that contaminated rice oil. leading them to have a higher body toxicity burden than even longtime consumers of seafood. But after a modified fasting regimen, all 16 patients they tried it on showed improvements, with some enjoying dramatic relief of their sufferings. But this was after just a few days of fasting, so they couldn't have really lost that much body fat. And they didn't measure PCBs before and after, so it's not clear that they were experiencing some sort of detox, nor what relevance this has for people who haven't been acutely poisoned. The initial rise in pollutant levels in the first year of weight loss may eventually stabilize or fall. In Biosphere 2, a remarkable experiment designed to be a completely closed ecosystem, the longest sustained period of humans isolated in a confined environment on record. But due to crop failures, it turned into a 2-year experiment of calorie restriction. They all lost about 25 pounds in the first 6 months and stabilized there. And while the levels of PCBs and a DDT metabolite known as DDE initially went up, they appeared to start coming back down, but that initial spike is quite a jump. That's one of the reasons health authorities recommend women don't try to slim down during breastfeeding. Breast is still best regardless, but you can keep your levels lower by not going out of your way to lose weight until after breastfeeding is finished. What can one do to help flush the contaminants during weight loss? Well, one of the reasons the pollutant levels in the biosphere subjects eventually dropped is because they were eating a high-fiber diet centered around fruits, whole grains, beans, nuts, and vegetables. And we know that fiber can bind to these pollutants and potentially flush them out of the body. So in losing weight, eating lots of whole grains may be important to increase the elimination of pollutants, while of course cutting down on animal fat, including fish, so you don't pile on extra at the same time. What about just eating some Pringles? What was the dietary intervention in this randomized trial to decrease the body burden of pollutants? Subjects were randomized to 24 fat-free Pringles a day, or regular Pringles. What? Why? It all started with this crazy case report of a guy heavily contaminated by PCBs who managed to rid himself of 90% by losing weight eating potato chips made out of the fake fat olestra, which doesn't get absorbed, and so appears to pull pollutants out of the bloodstream into the stool for elimination. It works in mice, increasing the excretion of hexachlorobenzene 30-fold and cutting the levels in their brains in half, but in people, the drop in PCB blood levels with the olestra Pringles was not statistically significantly greater, and for some reason, LDL bad cholesterol levels shot up 28 points in the olestra group. And while olestra and drugs like cholestyramine may absorb pollutants and remove them from your system, they also may cause you to dump fat-soluble vitamins. So, to get the best of both worlds, losing pollution without losing vitamins, fiber-rich foods may be our best choice. Instead of olestra supplementation to detox, why not try to not tox so much in the first place?
We would love it if you could share with us your stories about reinventing your health through evidence-based nutrition. Go to NutritionFacts.org/testimonials. We may be able to share it on social media to help inspire others. If you want to see any of the graphs, charts, graphics, images, or studies mentioned here, please go to the Nutrition Facts podcast landing page. There you'll find all the detailed information you need, plus links to all the sources we cite for each of these topics. My latest book, How Not to Age, is out now. Check it out from your local public library. And of course, all the proceeds from the sale of all of my books goes directly to charity. NutritionFacts.org is a nonprofit science-based public service where you can sign up for free daily updates on the latest in nutrition research with bite-sized videos and articles. Everything on the website is free. There are no ads, no corporate sponsorships, no kickbacks, strictly non-commercial. I'm not selling anything. I just put it up as a public service, as a labor of love, as a tribute to my grandmother, whose own life was saved with evidence-based nutrition.